Yes, and we are live. I'm here with my new friend Scott. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's Thursday, so it's like I've got almost a full week under my belt, so I'm a little bit like worn out from that. But other than that, everything's good. It's raining here in Montreal. What's it like down in southern Texas?
It is not raining. It's we had some rain a couple of weeks ago, which was really good to get. It was a blessing because we've been really dry. So
Oh, oh, okay, okay. So you don't get snow usually?
not where I'm at. So I'm closer to the Mexican border than I am to any other state in the union. So I'm pretty far south. So
Yeah.
uh, it's pretty. We did get snow during Snowmageddon a few years ago, which was when the entire state
Uh,
got snowed in.
uh,
But I think that was the first time we'd had snow. It's probably been 20 years since we had snow before that.
and it probably didn't pile up 20 feet
No.
high or anything like that.
Yeah, we get snow about once a decade or so, and it usually doesn't last too terribly long.
Have you been up to Canada, Montreal, or
I have
Toronto?
not been to Canada. I've been up number of the states and north, but I've
Uh,
actually spent internationally. I've gone more south than north. So I've
you're a smart
I've been to
man.
Central America, Mexico, Chile, Paraguay, South America, but I haven't made it up to Canada yet.
Yeah, smart move, smart move. So
Oh,
listen,
I wouldn't mind going up there. I don't want to live up there, but
yeah,
I wouldn't mind
yeah,
visiting.
yeah, for sure. So I'd like you to paint a little picture of your journey. I mean, I try not to find out about my guests, but I think I figured out that you're Christian or something like that. So your faith journey, if that's the appropriate word, you'll
Sure.
tell me. But sort of walk us through from early childhood. I like to get a glimpse of the home life where you raised Christian, or some of the things that stick out in your memory very young. And then how did you, when you came to think for yourself and to make your own decisions about worldview, how did you wrestle with this or that and end up where you are today? Walk us through the whole journey, please.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to share that. So I grew up in a Christian home. Had a mom, dad, older sister. Obviously, like normal sibling things, we had our sibling rivalries and whatnot. But we grew up. We were Methodist, so I
Ah,
grew up in a Methodist household. We attended the local Methodist church. My father was active. I became a liturgist and did other things in the church, part of the youth group, all of those sorts of things. Pretty much did that my entire up into high school years. In high school, as I kind of became more aware of things, I began to look and study other religions and other faiths. I attended other denominations and other faith backgrounds, mainly just because I was curious about what else was out there, and I began to read other books and what the Quran and other traditions, just exposing myself to what was out there. At the same time, there was a lot of conflict going on in my home. My father was an alcoholic. He was a pillar of the community out in the world, and then uh, abusive drunk at home. And so I kind of began to see that hypocrisy of everyone at church. He was a wonderful guy, and at home he wasn't, and had a lot of conflict in my own heart around spirituality and faith and the church. I got told by other church members that because I'd even looked at a book from any other religion, I was automatically going to hell. That you can't study other religions, you can't attend other churches, you have to do the Christian thing. That's the only way. Various other things, and so I actually left the church by the time I was in college. I told people I was an atheist, but I really was more of an agnostic, and that I still studied religion. I still read books. I still went to services with friends and things when they invited me, but I wasn't actively pursuing faith at that point. I began to treat it more as a philosophy study than as a spiritual study or a faith based study. And I was an atheist or agnostic for 25 plus years, where I never set foot in another church. I kind of left that. Uh, I I kind of subscribe to the Lord, please save me from your people kind of mentality of things, in that I believed in God, but I didn't believe that what we were doing served God. If that makes sense, I felt kind of that it was hypocritical in a way. Um, and over the years, I got married, got divorced, got married to my current wife. We had a son, and he enrolled in karate, and his karate teacher was also a pastor of a
Ah,
house church, a small house church.
ah,
And he invited us to come, and we came, and we started attending, and that kind of invited me back into a community of Christians that was different than the one that I had grown up with.
ah.
Over the next year, there's a Methodist church that's literally 2 minutes from our house. We can walk to it in the morning, and we started attending there. And I got back into the Methodist community. I now teach. I'm the head of lay servant ministries for all of the Rio, Texas conference, which basically means I teach other lay people throughout the conference. So pretty much all of South Texas. I do pulpit fill. I preach about 50 times a year in various churches. I do a lot of different things now for the church. I serve on several boards and all of that. So I kind of went Methodist, agnostic, Methodist. My pastor's joke is, you're either really all in or all out, aren't you? You're not, you kind of don't do things halfway. So, because now I'm very deeply involved in the church again and do a lot of work and a lot of ministry and a lot of service-based things for the church.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. Yeah, so this is why I don't read the bios of my guests, because I want, it's so exciting to hear it from your lips. Like if I had read that, okay, I would have some idea, and then I would hear you repeat it. I'd be like, okay, maybe it would add to something, but to hear it fresh, it's so exciting, the journey, and your journey's not over. I'm not saying you're gonna become agnostic tomorrow, but
I don't know, might happen. I hope not, but maybe.
But I was gonna make a joke earlier, inappropriate joke, when you said your dad was like nice at church and a jerk at home. I'm the opposite. I'm a jerk at church. I'm nice at home, but
Well, hey, at least there's something there.
I'm just joking. No, I'm pretty nice at church. But my problem with church is, it's just like it's not very community oriented. And one of my Protestant friends that I met on the podcast, he's always asking, "What is church? How can we do church?" And for him, church has to involve getting to know other people in the pews next to you. You can't just smile
Agree.
at them once or twice a week. So how would you answer that? Before we get into some of your pet topics, just answer for my friend Christopher Rice. He's always asking, what is church and how can we have community? I know you got back into the faith, like the practice of the faith, because of a home church, and that's kind of what my friend is excited about, that idea. So what would you say, how can we do church? How did the early how did the apostles do church, and the people that followed after the apostles?
So to me, church is about that community. I actually agree with your friend's view. I don't think church is the building, and I don't even necessarily think church is even the people that are just sitting in the pews on Sunday morning. Yes, that community is important too, but then there's also the wider community. So as an example, the church that I'm in, we on an average Sunday we have about 100 people in the pew,
Wow.
but we feed over 1,000 people every single month through various food ministries that we do.
Ah, nice.
So 100 people are feeding over 1,000 people.
Ah,
We had in the last 365 days we had 20 funerals. Only 11 of them were church members.
ah,
Everything else was people in the community that needed a place for a funeral, and they
ah,
come to us and they're like, "You're my church." They've
ah.
never attended a Sunday service. They have never attended a Sunday service, and it's not expected of them, and it's not demanded of them. That's okay. We're still their church because we're the place they go that greets them and that meets them where they are and that loves on them and that helps them out and that but doesn't do it in a way of it's there's an expectation put upon you because of it.
Is
It's
this the
just,
Methodist way? Is this typical of the Methodist or no?
I would say uh it's hard to answer that. So yes and no. I would say that if you go back to the roots of Methodism and you look at what John Wesley started, and the birth of the Methodist movement was through a gentleman named John Wesley and his brother Charles Wesley, and they did do a lot of social justice and a lot of outreach, and they went and preached in the prisons and in the open air. And in fact, he was against it at first because he was raised in the Church of England, which was very
Ah,
stodgy
high
and
church, yeah.
very, very high church. And Methodist it's weird. We're this weird amalgam of high church and not, at the same turn. We do very structured liturgy and very kind of high churchy stuff.
Okay.
And yet we also do very service oriented outreach. It is this weird kind of dichotomy in the Methodist group. And I would say that, that root is still there of social justice and doing service and doing ministry through those actions. At the same time, I would say in the modern Methodist movement, there are a lot of Methodist churches that have moved away from that. And the way I always put it is, and this is a quote from somebody, but I honestly cannot remember who, and I've never been able to find it again, so I don't know who I'm quoting. But at some point, a lot of churches move from being fishers of men to being keepers of the aquarium.
Ah,
When we start to focus only on what's us, what are we doing for us? What ministry programs do we have for us? What spiritual development programs do we have for us? What are we doing for us, the people in the four walls? We sometimes lose track of the fact that, what we were called to do was to go out and serve others and love on others and greet others and help others, and I think we lose track of that a lot in the church, and I think there's Methodist churches that have lost track of that.
yeah.
So it's hard to make a blanket statement they all do that, but I would say that's the root.
Yeah. So, sounds exciting. I mean, my church is in crisis, the Catholic Church, but it's always in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's the firm teaching of the hierarchy that the individual priest of the parish is supposed to know everybody. He's supposed to know that not only the Catholics, but the non-Catholic Christians, not only the Christians, but everyone.
Right.
Be involved, but it's not practical because we don't have the numbers. Like we don't have the priesthood is struggling just like every other aspect of the church. So, it's a nice idea, but there are other Christian denominations who are actually doing it. Like it sounds like yours is thriving in that way, and so that's good to hear. A lot of people say that they've never heard anything bad about John Wesley. I mean, there are lots of horror stories about Luther. You can find dirt on him, like a lot of really disgusting dirt, actually, especially from a Catholic perspective. But a lot of people say that Wesley was just a stand-up guy, really admirable. And have you looked into his life?
Yeah, actually, there's a great book. If you ever want to read it, it's about that thick, so it's not a light read.
Okay.
But it's called John Wesley and the People Called Methodist. It goes into his whole history. Yes, I've read it. Yes, I'm that big of a nerd. And literally, I was reading it and walked into the church with it one Sunday, and my pastor looked at me and said, "You're not in seminary. Why are you reading that?" So, she's like, "Oh, the only people that have to read that are the people that are in seminary. You shouldn't. You don't have to read that." But it's actually a really good read. And Wesley actually has his dirt too. I think
Ooh.
everybody does. There was an incident that's famously known as the Georgia incident, where he had a young lady that he was, they were in a relationship, not inappropriate in any way, shape, or form, but there was a falling out between them, and he refused to give her communion or give her father communion,
Uh,
which of course is not what you're supposed to do, and basically got ran out of town on a rail. And there's more to the story, but he got sent back home from America to England because he
wow.
screwed up badly
Wow.
enough that they chased him back out of town and sent him home.
Wow.
So he learned from it, but yeah, I don't think there's any. Wesley has a famous sermon called "On to Perfection," and
Okay.
the key there is on to perfection, in that we're not there
Yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think any of us are there yet. That's not the point. The point isn't to achieve the point is to be going towards perfection all of the time. I don't know that any of us ever get there on this side of heaven. Just because we're people, we're gonna screw it up. I've screwed up. I mean, I'm sure you have. No, never you led a perfect life. We all do. And part of it is, what do we do about it when that happens? That to me is more important than the whether or not they've led to perfection. Is what lessons do they learn from it? How did they respond to that? What did they take away from it? That's almost more valuable than leading a perfect life in some ways.
Yeah, kill all the witnesses, kill all the. Just
Yeah.
kidding. But my friend is asking about, the Jesus movement, where they were outdoors and they had tents and music and stuff like that. Was that, was there any crossover between your lineage, your tradition, and the Jesus movement of, what was that, 50s, 60s? What was that?
There was the Methodists went through a period where they were heavy into the revival movement, which is the tent movement. In fact, the church that I attend started as a revival church in a tent,
Oh,
and then
okay.
later they put a building there, and now there's a
Oh,
bigger building there. That kind of thing.
ah,
So it wasn't exactly the same as what I understand to be the Jesus movement, but it was in that same period and kind of parallel to it. Um,
ah,
the Methodists have always been a what they call an itinerant system, meaning pastors are not permanently in a place; they move from place to place. They've always been very interested in growth and revival. Even in England, where it started, before it came over to America, there were small groups and bands that went and met outside of church, which was, again, scandalous. People are meeting about church outside of church. Nowadays we look at that and go, yeah, but back then that was a big deal. And in fact, that's actually the name Methodist came from the idea that Wesley had set up a series of things that people should do, including taking communion as often as you can, meeting in small groups once a week, doing service and serving in like prisons and these sorts of things. There were things that you should do. It was a method to be serving well. And so the name Methodist was actually meant as an insult.
ah,
People said, well, it's John Wesley and his method,
ah.
and and he was like, I'll take the name. Okay. So we're the Methodists. So that's how we became Methodist. But yeah, the church revivals and all of that with the the outdoors in the tents and all of that, yes, there was a big movement for that in the Methodist movement. In fact, that's probably where the largest growth of the Methodist movement came from, in the 50s.
Did you ever look into the history of the Catholic Church and the rites and the liturgy and
Mhm.
real presence in the Eucharist and the our transubstantiation of understanding of that and the priesthood and all the things in Mary and all the things that are the Pope, all the things that are so Catholic, and obviously there's going to be some overlap with the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and those sorts of things,
Mhm.
but if you've looked into it at all, what would you say are like what's the common ground with, particularly with the Methodist, and then what's sort of contrast those things that are radically different?
So the similarities, I think at the end of the day, the biggest similarity is that we're all doing the best that we can to follow Jesus. That the Christian part is the biggest
Mm,
similarity,
mm.
the following Christ. Now, there are differences in how we're structurally arranged. There are differences in how we do, liturgy and what it looks like. Though honestly, the Methodist liturgy, I've had Catholics that attend. In fact, the joke
Oh.
is, if a Baptist and a Catholic get married, they become Methodist,
Ah. Yeah.
because it's sort of like they've
Uh,
got enough Catholic stuff in the way we do things that they recognize it, enough Baptist stuff in the
ah.
way we
Ah.
do things that they recognize it, and so they're kind of both comfortable.
Ah.
Because we do, again, like I said, we have a lot of high church liturgy that's very similar. I mean, we don't do it in Latin and some of the other things, but it's not, if you're a Catholic and you attend a Methodist service, you recognize the pattern of service. It feels similar, that kind of thing. Um, as far as, we recognize saints in a similar
Oh
way,
yeah.
but not identical to the way they do in the
Ah.
Catholic Church. But there are Methodists that will have, a saint symbology that they use.
Mm.
So it's not, again, not the same, no,
Uh-huh.
but similar, not as different as people might make it out to be. And yet, at the same time, obviously there's things that are different
Yeah.
in terms of, how, we don't pray the rosary, we don't pray, certain things like that.
Do you have
But
set prayers?
we do have set prayers. We have some set prayers, and we have rite and ritual that we do, with a regular
Any
pattern.
incense and stuff like that?
No incense,
Okay.
not usually. There will be some of the Methodist churches used to do that,
Yeah.
but not so much anymore.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of moved away from that.
That's pretty cool. So, yeah, it's fascinating thinking about that. So when you settled on Methodism, is it just for you? Because I'm Catholic because I believe that it's the fullness of Christianity. Do you see the Methodist community as the fullness of the Christian way, or do you just see it like, hey, this suits me, and I'm going to just do it?
How about none of the
Yeah,
above? So it's not either of those. It's not just because it's comfortable or it's the way
familiar.
or familiar. I love the roots of the Methodist ideas of service and justice, and
Yeah,
that 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 to me is the fullness of the gospel. The good news message is that fullness of love, service, and justice, and speaking truth to those in power, saying the uncomfortable things out loud, doing those sorts of things to me is very Christian.
yeah.
I see that expression in the Methodist movement. What I would say though is I don't ever think of it as the exclusive expression.
Okay.
So I have Catholic friends. I have even Muslim friends or Jewish friends who I'm not going to take anything away from their faith journey and their faith expression and the reality of their relationship with God, or deride that or say that it's. I don't know enough to know that it's wrong. I always tell people that those are the sorts of things that are above my pay scale. You know what I mean? In other words, it's God's decision to see if that's right or wrong for that person and that individual. It's not mine. So I shouldn't put myself in the place of going, you have a Catholic belief and that's wrong.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're doing something that is wrong. I can talk to you about that, but the
Well,
belief is different.
we're worshiping God in what looks like a piece of bread. So is that wrong from your perspective? Or do you do the same thing? Do you do the same thing?
You're worshiping God through the representation of a piece of bread, introducing that relationship.
But we believe it's actually, really,
I
truly, and
know.
actually the body, blood, soul, and divinity. Do you guys believe that?
No. Generally, we don't believe in that, but
Does he come and hover around that area, or is there some kind of special
yes, we invite the spirit. We invite the spirit into
consubstantiation or something like that?
Yeah, it's more that.
Okay.
So it is still an invitation of relationship, but whether, again, I can't know if that's right or wrong or true. I don't know enough to know if I'm right or
But I
you're
got my
right or we're
handy
both
book. I got
wrong.
my handy dandy book here. I got my handy dandy book. It's snappy answers to stupid questions. Everything you want to know is in one book. But I'm being silly. But I mean, the fact is that I have a church that tells me what is essential, what I have to believe, and
I know.
what I can't believe, and that sort of thing. I'm sure you have an equivalent, and it would tell you about.
And not as much in the Methodists.
No, not as
I mean, we
thorough.
have doctrine and theology that we
Yeah.
believe that is fundamental, but there's like literally 9 tenets in the fundamental,
Oh,
theology. It's
wow.
not a
Can you list them?
57-page
Can you
book.
can you go through them by
Oh, not
memory?
off the top of my head.
You
Not off
got
the top
Google
of
in
my
front of you?
head. It's
I could Google it right
but
now.
there are things like there. The point is, for Methodists, it's also about the questions we have is also okay.
Yeah.
It's not about knowing all the answers.
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, of course, of course. There's mystery.
and it's not about even, it's okay to not, you know, basically we believe in one God, we believe in the Trinity, and we believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ as the three biggest fundamentals
Yeah,
to us.
cool.
The rest of it is details, you know.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, those are the big three. After that, there are a few other things, but they're not like, for instance, belief in, communion is an act of redemption and relationship.
yeah,
But we have an open table, meaning if you walk into our church and you want to take communion,
yeah,
take communion.
yeah,
There's no requirements. You don't technically have to even subscribe or express a belief in Jesus Christ. Technically,
yeah,
it's open to all.
yeah.
Uh, so it's those tenets are held strongly and loosely at the same time, in terms of they're strong for us, but we don't look at it as, but everyone else who does it another way is automatically wrong.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You're in Texas, right? And when I
Hmm.
think about the United States, I think about, red and blue states and whatever, and I think about whenever I hear about Methodism, I always think about Donald Trump. His background is Methodist. Did you know that?
Yeah.
So is
I would argue he's not a Methodist, but yes.
that was my question. That was my question, is to like, how can you tell? How can you tell? And my suspicion is he's not really that Christian or whatever. But I don't know the man. I pray for him. But yeah, what would tell you that he's not Methodist, just off the top of your head, just
Again,
for
it's,
the...
it's practice.
Okay.
The way he expresses his faith, to me, is not in alignment with what I consider the Methodist movement. Now, again, there are Methodists that would disagree with me on that.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't consider that authentic to the fundamentals of the Methodist movement.
Well, yeah, like I
You
mean,
know,
I'm Catholic. I'm not saying I'm a good Catholic, but I I know what I'm supposed to believe, think, say, and do, and including all that great stuff that you're doing in your community. That I applaud you for that, and I want more of that. But of course, the Catholic Church is famous for the charitable works, and I
absolutely.
donate to a couple of them, and stuff like that. But when I look at Prime Minister Trudeau up here in Canada, he's claiming to be Catholic. It's kind of like the same thing with Biden, and then with Trump claiming to be Methodist. It's kind of like, it's I leave it in God's hand. It's between him and God. But
Absolutely. Yep.
there are a lot of objective realities that we could point to if we wanted to make our case, right? That these people aren't really doing it. I don't know.
Well,
I
at
don't know
least,
what you think about. I don't know what you think about Biden, but from a Catholic perspective, I mean, he's pushing abortion. He just went to some big abortion promotion event, and that's not on, right?
so there, yeah, again, whether or not somebody is, there's the political arguments, and then there's the religious arguments. And like you said, I don't know enough to know what's between them and God is between them and God, not between me and them. At the same time, it's, I can judge the actions that they have and whether or not I'm in agreement with that, but those are separate. That's not because he is or isn't my faith. That's because whether or not his beliefs, the actions that he's taking are in alignment with the actions that I would support or not. And it's not, for me, it's never just one issue. There's a myriad of issues
Yeah,
that I want to look for. There's no one issue that is the one deciding thing that if you agree with me on that one issue,
yeah,
I'm always going to vote for you. I'm an independent. I voted for members of both parties as well as third parties over my lifetime. So, I consider myself an independent voter, in that I look for the issues and try to look for, as the pattern of issues, and whether or not I support them over the majority of the issues that they have, if that makes sense.
yeah. When it comes to the sort of the progressive, the stereotype of the progressive Christian, it would be things like, pro gay marriage. In the Catholic Church, it would be pro women's ordination, which is like forbidden. You know, pro abortion, which is also forbidden. So that's like, so the progressive thing, you know. There's some controversy, a tempest in a teacup or whatever, because the church has made a document about blessing people who happen to
Same
be
sex member.
yeah. So it's
Hmm.
like a, you know, the
You
people.
can't conduct a marriage, but you can conduct a blessing over them after,
Well,
or
it's just a
whatever.
sin.
Yeah.
It's like we bless sinners. That's all we do. It's all we do.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
blessing. It's very rare we have a saint standing in front of you to get a blessing, right? Usually it's
Right.
sinners. So, I mean, it's a call to repentance, like my shirt says, repent, because Jesus said, repent and believe. So, how progressive are you, and how progressive is your church when it comes to LGBTQ, when it comes to abortion and these sorts of things?
So the Methodist movement actually is currently undergoing a schism because of the homosexuality issue. So the United Methodists, which is what I'm part of, back in 1974, they changed their kind of rule book called the Book of Discipline to say that practicing homosexuals could not be ordained. We do ordain women,
Ah,
but they in 74 they added the language that practicing homosexuals could not be ordained. There has been basically every 4 years we have a meeting to vote on should we change our rules. And every 4 years, this is not our theology. This is our kind of bylaws. Think of it as our organizing documents as opposed to our theological documents. Theology is not changing. Um, and we've been arguing about it ever since it was added, because there's progressives and there's conservatives. Not too long ago, there was a split, and there was a rule put in place that if people disagreed on this issue, they could leave under a certain rule. And so there's a new denomination formed called the Global Methodist Church, GMC, that a lot of the very conservative churches left and went to join that group because they said that they are going to keep that language about the homosexuality not being ordained, and they're going to encode that, and that will never change, and that is the rule forever. And the United Methodists said, no, we can continue to wrestle with this topic and talk about this topic. It's not something that we're not going, we may not change it, we may change it, we don't know yet. It's something we're wrestling with as a denomination. So a lot of churches left. There were about 5,000 churches out of the 38,000 or 36,000 in the world. The Methodist is a worldwide
oh,
denomination, so
oh,
we govern everything at a worldwide level, which is really hard to do. Most
yeah.
of the homosexual issues that churches have dealt with have been at a local level or at a regional level. Because there are very different rules. Africa is a very different place from England, which is a very different place from the United States. That in terms of how things look. So the about 5,000 churches left to form the Global Methodist Church, 5 to 6,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, and that's kind of the very, very traditional conservative group. The more progressives and people that were maybe not as dramatic about that issue or didn't feel as strongly about that issue, a lot of them have stayed. And so I have remained United Methodist. I tend to be more on the side of I'm wrestling with a lot of things. I don't believe that we can encode any one sin and not encode the others. In other words, it's interesting to me that there's a long list of sins, and that's the one you want to pick and throw in the mix and say, that's it, that's the one, that's the bad one. The rest of these aren't nearly as bad. That's how it comes across to me. It's not, is it a sin or not? It's, why are we picking on a sin? It's all of them. I don't believe that pastors or priests or ordained people are automatically made perfect. And yet at the same time, I also think they're held to a higher standard. So, but what does that look like? There are pastors and priests that have done horrible things in all denominations. I mean, I don't have to. I'm not going to pick on the Catholic Church or any other church, because quite frankly, we've all got them. That you go and look at it and you find these horrible things, and yet that's not what we want to talk about. We want to talk about that one issue. So I tend to be on the more progressive side, but not because it's a oh, it's not a
Not
sin,
license. It's
or it
not
is a
license. You
sin.
don't give
It's not
license.
licensed. Yeah, it's just more of I think that's something that we're wrestling with as a people, of what does that look like for God and for us.
Yeah, not only wrestling with it, but you know, taking care of our brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
It's not like, yeah, we're going to ostracize one particular type of masturbation, because there are all kinds of types of masturbation. Like, just because you're hetero, I mean, if you're an unrepentant masturbator, in my Catholic church, that's forbidden.
Right.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what the Protestant communities have to say about masturbation, but in the Catholic Church, it's forbidden. It's a grave sin.
Right.
Now, there are obviously circumstances that will lessen the culpability, but it's we wouldn't have much church membership if if, for example, you're just excommunicated for being a masturbator. And for
Right.
me, any type of sexual thing outside of marriage, even within marriage, like, there's a lot of stuff that happens inside of marriage. Like, you can't just say, hey, I got carte blanche now because I'm married, I could do whatever I want with my spouse. No, we have we have to be holy because God is holy, and it's not easy. I don't think there are a lot of people living up to the sexual morality of Christianity inside or outside of marriage. So yeah,
Right.
who are we to really judge? It's just to make ourselves feel better. We look down our nose at a target group.
It's also it's a sin that I think for a lot of people it's quote obvious, meaning it's obvious and icky, meaning they can, and I don't believe it's icky, don't take my
Okay,
word, but for
okay.
them, you know what I mean,
I
it
see what you're
makes
saying.
them uncomfortable.
I
It's
see what you're
something
saying.
they can
Yeah,
see and it makes them uncomfortable,
it's
where
identifiable. It's identifiable. Yeah,
it's identifiable, where a lot of the other sins are ones that you don't necessarily know.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And and even if you broaden it and take it out of the sexual arena and
yeah,
go
yeah,
wider
yeah,
than that, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
gossip
yeah,
is a sin.
yeah, yeah. Gluttony.
Have any of us not gossiped?
Well,
I mean, I love the people that use what I call Christian gossip, which is public prayer. You know, you know. I mean, there are times that public prayer turns into Christian gossip. We want to pray for Mary because her husband has been drinking so much, and it's like,
oh
what?
my
What are you talking
God.
about? Don't do that. That kind of thing.
Oh,
We do these things, and it's not bad because it's something that we do.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I
yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah,
But
yeah,
if
yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah.
but it's the things that we don't do; those are obviously the worst sins a lot of times. And no, I am a sinner. I freely, but I'm also a saint. In that I've got God within me. We've all been created in that divine image, and that humanity and that Godhood that is within us is also there. So it's that tension is there in all of us between being a saint and a sinner all the time. Um, at least to me, that's how I wrestle with it.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about, virtue, vice, and the Ten Commandments, stuff like that. And my priest, luckily I got a good priest now, and he's very accommodating in the confessional. We go to confessional if you do that. But
Hmm.
I'm always confessing about my sloth. That's a huge one. My gluttony. That's a huge one. Lack of patience or anger, whatever it is. There are many things that we um, take for granted, that it's just okay. It's just normal. I'm only human, and whatever. But it's not. We're not striving for perfection. As you said, it's like we're on our
Right.
way. We but if you're not advancing, you're backsliding. That's my experience. If you're not trying to, if you're not struggling, if you're not striving, if you just say it's okay, I'm only human, and
Well, that's different.
everyone else
Yeah.
is doing it, right? And not only that, it's in all the TV, movies, and everything. Everyone's sort of applauding this behavior. It's being
Right.
encouraged. So not to mention avarice, or people that are ambitious and really power hungry for money or whatever. A lot of these things are encouraged by the society, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and it is that wrestling though that to me that's important. I mean, I don't. You're right. I don't think you just accept at any level. Again, this isn't just theology. This is just life. If you look at your failures or your mistakes or your problems and you go, "Oh, that's just the way it is," well, that's not really healthy, for lack of a better word. That's not, you're not striving for being better today than you were yesterday. I mean, that's so it's a both and. A lot of for me, a lot of theology comes down to both and as opposed to either or. I think for us as humans, we like to put things into boxes and say it's either this or it's that. And I believe, and this is how I phrase it, that a lot of times in God's world, it's not either or, it's both and. It is that you are both a sinner and a saint, not either or. And your sin, yes, can separate you from God. I mean, that's, sin means missing the mark. It means separation from relationship with God. So it is something you want to strive against. And yet the reality is also that God knows that you're probably going to fail sometimes. You're going to screw up. You're going to make a mistake. All of those things are true at the same time. you know
Yeah.
and and we have a hard time dealing with that because we want things to be nice, clear cut in boxes, and have a nice border around them, preferably with filigree, and emblems and everything. That's not the theology that I see God putting out. It tends to be topsy-turvy. It tends to be counter to how we think the world should run, and what should be held up as an idol, or held up as a positive thing. It's usually the opposite of that is what is being held up in God's theology. It's which is uncomfortable for us. That's weird. I mean, we don't that's hard to accept because it doesn't feel right, and yet it is.
My friend, I want to give a shout out to a couple of my friends in the live chat here. I got Phil Gonzalez. He's Catholic. I've had him on my show. There's my friend Nicola Krisick. He's Catholic, and then my new friend. I'm gonna have him on my show. I can't remember if he told me his actual name or not, but his YouTube handle is LGBTQ Canadian Anglican. So that's quite a
Okay.
handle. It's quite a handle. So that tells you a lot about him, and I'm gonna have him on my show very soon, I think. But there's a question from the live chat. My friend Nicola's asking, "Are the saved sinners? Are there saved sinners that are not yet saints? Are there saved sinners that are not yet saints?" I want to jump in and answer it quickly from my perspective.
Sure.
There's a small s saint, and then there's the big S saint. The small s saints are just like Christians, right? And then the big
Right.
S saints are those who are held up as examples because of what how they properly believed and lived, and they suffered and died, and these sorts of things. So that's my answer. What's your answer?
I would agree with you. I mean, I think when I was using saint earlier, I'm using it in what you would say is the small s sense of, we are all called to be in relationship with God as saints, and yet we are also all sinners, at the same time. I, and again, it's, to me, it's less of a, are you one or the other, or how do you cross over from one or the other, and more of a yes. The answer is yes, you're both all the time. It is that tension and that struggle that is the nature of that human relationship with God. If we could do it perfectly, the kingdom would be here already. And that is what we're supposed to be striving for, is creating the kingdom of heaven on earth, right? Bringing that reality to earth. And yet at the same time, none of us know what that reality actually looks like yet, because we haven't been there.
Yeah.
So it is that striving that, to me, is the tension that's important. But I don't think it's that you're one or the other at any time. I think it's more of you're both all the time at some level.
Yeah, when I read, my favorite apostles, for example, when I read about them in the Bible, it's very clear, that they're flawed in some ways, and we all have our unique strengths and weaknesses, and like Peter, Saint Paul, whatever, they've got their
Hmm.
strengths and weaknesses, and it's a work in progress, and Saint Paul makes it very, very clear, that we have to strive and we have to keep our eye on the
Right.
prize, and discipline ourselves like a prize fighter or an athlete or whatever, and
Run
just
run the race,
run the
and yep,
race and all that sort of thing. It's very, very clear. It's very, very clear to me that we're not once saved, always saved. It's an ongoing thing.
right.
So, what do you say? What do you say to Christians, like Protestants, who really firmly believe that they have their salvation already in hand and nothing can ever take it away from them? Um, when St. Paul, he's quite a hero of the faith, I think, by the grace of God. And yet he spoke in a way that made it seem like he didn't have that same assurance that people in 2024 are claiming to have. So how do you deal with
Right.
that?
So that was actually, again, going back to the early Methodist movement, that was a big debate. So there were Calvinists and there were Methodists, and the Calvinists believed in predestination, that you were born saved and you were always saved, and that you didn't lose it. And I'm oversimplifying, but and John Wesley actually believed in grace that was ongoing. And so it's one grace, but he talked about it in three different ways. So it's, to be clear, I'm going to talk about three things, but it's not three different graces.
Right.
It's one grace, but he kind of talks about the flavors or the subcomponents of it, for lack of a better description, right? And so it's prevenient grace, which is the grace that comes before. So before I even knew there was a God, God was there. Before I was even a glimmer in my mommy and daddy's eye, God was there, and God was already wanting a relationship with me even before I existed. That's prevenient, the grace that comes before. Justifying is that moment of recognition when we say, wait, there is a God, and that relationship, we say yes to that relationship. So prevenient is God coming wooing us, and justifying is us saying yes. And again, I'm crunching about 30,000 words of theology into 18, but that moment of justification is when we say yes to God. Wesley talked about a moment where he heard a preacher delivering a passage, and his heart was strangely warmed when he suddenly by the way, he was already a pastor,
Oh.
and it was his moment of conversion.
Was he
He
ever
was already a pastor.
was he ever Catholic or no?
He was Anglican. He was a Church of England. So
Ah,
he was not Catholic. He was Church of England.
okay.
So he had that moment where he suddenly realized that he had a relationship with Christ, a personal relationship with Christ. That's the justifying grace. And by the way, notice he was already he'd already taken ordination vows and stuff, and yet that's the moment he claims to be saved, so to speak. And then after that, so it's prevenient, justifying, um, and sanctifying. And sanctifying grace is the grace that goes with you the rest of your days. So it's that moment of sometimes you're going to fall back, but grace is still there to help pull you forward. That relationship is still there. But he did believe we had an active part in that act of sanctification, in that if we just sat back passively and said, all right, I've been saved, everything's good now, then no, we would fall away from sanctification. We're no longer on that pathway. Now, what happens because of that? I don't know. That's up to God. In other words, do you still go to heaven and all of those sort of? I don't know. Okay, God has the rule book. I don't have the rule book, but I do think it's important for our relationship and everything that we do with God. It is important that we have those moments of sanctification that are ongoing throughout our life to keep us moving, so that again, we're a little bit more. We're always a saint, we're always a sinner, but we're a little bit more saint, a little less sinner, tomorrow than we are today. And that's a struggle. That's not easy. That doesn't happen without work. It doesn't happen without ongoing community. Back to the question about what is church. That's one of the reasons we need church, is for that ongoing community of believers around us to go, hey, dude, you got this. Come on, let's go. We can do this together. Let's take a step forward. We need that. We need not only a relationship with God, but also a relationship with the community around us as well to be able to do it. We can't do it on our own.
Yeah. So when you think about the Ten Commandments, you know, Jesus boiled it down to two: love of God, love of neighbor. Um, what you know, how particular do you get in your own walk with Christ when you think about, because Christ said, if you love me, keep my commandments, right? So
Right.
I think about the Ten Commandments as really, you know, six. I break it down into six, and then I can sort of group them into two major groups: love of God, love of neighbor. And you know, I'm aware that there's an application to one or more of the Ten Commandments in every moral choice that I make. You know, should I do this? Should I not do it? Whatever. Uh, One or more commandments will be pertinent to that question. So, how do you deal with the Ten Commandments? Are you actively thinking about it the way that I do? And does your Methodist tradition uh, put great weight on the Ten Commandments? Like in my Catholic church, we have what's called the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I'm sure you have catechisms too. But fully one quarter is dedicated to the Ten Commandments. So I'm just wondering about the emphasis with the Ten Commandments and how you deal with it and how it relates back to Jesus saying, "If you love me, keep my commandments."
Right. So we probably put less emphasis on quote memorizing or treating them as
Categories.
these specific categories or whatnot. I would agree with you, by the way, in terms of, you know, in a very real way, you can divide those commandments along with others. Because, by the way, the Ten Commandments are not by any means the only things that are listed as commandments in the Old Testament or in the New. There's a lot more than 10. But when you look at those groupings, most of them come down to, you know, are you doing things that are creating that loving relationship with God, or are you separating yourself from God? And are you creating the loving relationship with your neighbor, or are you separating yourself from your neighbor? You know, whether it's stealing or coveting or any of the other things, those are separating us from our neighbor, and often, you know, sometimes separating us from God too. It depends on the exact sin that you're doing or the way you're acting on it. But yeah, I do think about it in terms of, is this action that I'm doing, you know, is it helping my relationship with God, and is it being expressed in a way that loves and shows love for, you know, my neighbor? Whether that's you whether that I don't necessarily go down the list of the Ten Commandments to bounce it against that, but effectively I am, if that makes sense,
Just the
because like
general
you said,
vibe, the
you
general
know,
vibe of
yeah,
them.
yeah, because it does fall into, in other words, if I'm really doing that well, I wouldn't be breaking one of the Ten Commandments anyway, if that makes sense. Uh, but it's not because I'm necessarily bouncing them straight off the Ten Commandments. It's more
Yeah,
of the broader
yeah. I mean,
category.
the one commandment is love, and this is why when I talk with even with pantheists or you know, New Age people or Hindus or
Hmm.
whatever, you know, they tend to agree, you know, with the one law being love. I mean, even the Satanists
Right.
promote the one law of love, right? Like I used to be a Satanist myself, and I didn't subscribe to the you know the comic book version that's sold in books, but in the popular culture. But you know, Satanism is about reason, and it's also you know, there's a lot of talk about love.
Right.
So it seems like the one thing that a lot of people can get behind. The danger, obviously, is that you know it's being weaponized. This idea of love because it can turn into license. It could be confused with lust. It could be it's slippery. It could be slippery sometimes, right?
Right. Right. Well, and it's I think in part it's because the way we use that terminology isn't, you know, clear cut, right? You know, as an example, you know, and I'm going to use a simplistic example, you know, as a parent with a child, if, you know, screaming and yelling in your child's face, most people would say is not loving, right? But if you yell at your child to stop them from running into a crowded parking lot where they can get run over, that would be loving. So it's not the screaming that makes it loving or not loving. It's the intent behind it. It's the reason behind it. And that's part of what I think makes it hard is when I do something myself, I know my intent, but you don't. You think you know my intent, but you don't actually know my intent. And you never do, because you can't read my mind. Even if you ask me and I tell you what my intent was, you still could choose to believe me or not. It still doesn't feel that way. But yet we always know our own intent. And so in a way, it's that difficulty of knowing what's in the heart. That's, God knows that. God knows what's in our heart. God knows what our intent was. We don't when it comes to other people. And so instead we read into it, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly. And because of that confusion, I think that leads to a lot of that misunderstanding of what love really is and what love really isn't, if that makes sense. Love is not always saying yes. Love is not always, you know, puppy dogs and unicorns and rainbows. There are things that are loving that in another context would be harsh, but they're loving because of the intent behind them at that time. But then that can get confused, and people can say, well, that means I can say whatever I want to, do whatever I want because I meant well. Well, that's not what that means. It is a weird tension because of our humanity.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's what we like to say in the Catholic
Right.
Church. I think that's a general sentiment.
That's a paraphrasm. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to hell, I've met a lot of Christians who don't believe it or don't want to believe in it, or they think it's temporary, or they think that there's some annihilation that will take place. I mean, my rebuttal is that yeah, we don't like it. No one likes it, but that's what Christ taught, right? So, what's your take on the eternity of hell and all that sort of stuff?
Again, part of my answer is going to be it's above my pay grade, in that I don't really know for sure. But I do believe that there is a reality of being separated from God, and that would be hell.
Yeah.
What that actually looks like and exists and all of that. Again, God gets to decide that, not me. But I, I do think there is what I would call hell, is that eternity of being separated from God. To me, our journey is one towards being not one with, but being in the presence of God for eternity. That's the opposite of hell.
Yeah, well, we say in the Catholic Church there is such a thing as deification. We're entering into the life of the Trinity, but we remain separate. We remain creatures. Obviously, we remain finite, but there's an entering in, and there's that intimacy. I see you have a website. I put it in the show notes, inspiredstewardship.com/sweet. So talk about the website
No,
generally, and then
yeah,
what's the sweet spot? What's that all about?
but actually /CVS for your listeners is what it'll be.
Ah,
So,
okay, okay.
okay, I set up
CVS.
a special one just for you. So
Oh, /CVS.
uh,
Okay, cool. So
yeah.
what's that all
So if you
about?
go to inspiredstewardship.com/CVS, what I did is I set up a little landing page
Okay.
for your listeners with some free resources on it. So what I do, I'm a coach. I help a lot of folks. Obviously, I consider myself a stewardship coach. So I help people master their time, their talents, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling.
Mhm.
So I work in the areas of productivity and finance with a Christian mindset. I don't care if the people that come to me are Christian or not. Like I tell them, you don't have to be a Christian, but I am.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you have to be comfortable with the fact that I'm going to
yeah.
occasionally tell you, that's in Proverbs. Let's talk about that. um, you want a degree in finance? Go read Proverbs a couple of times. It'll give you a degree in finance. Trust me. But I in that resource guide on at /CVS, I have all of that information. I also have a book coming out this year called Inspired Living, which is on these same topics of how to assemble your call by mastering your time, your talent, and your treasures. And there's information about that as well there at /CVS, inspiredstewardship.com/CVS.
Cool. And I think you told me before we went live that you have your own podcast. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I actually, and the information for that is on that page too. My own podcast is called Inspired Stewardship. So I interview people, and kind of like you, I talk to them a lot about their faith journey and what brought them to the point that they're at. But then I also talk about what they do in the world and how how does what they believe show up in what they do, if
Ooh,
that makes sense,
ooh.
is kind of what I try to highlight. And then on Tuesdays I do a solo episode, which has I just take something, a passage from the Bible, and do a little bit of a spiritual teaching on it. So I do that every Tuesday, and I've been doing that since 2018. There's about 1,400 episodes of it currently.
Wow.
So I've been prolific.
Yeah.
At one
Wow.
time, I was doing it 6 days a week. So
Wow. Very cool. Uh, so when it comes to, guess I'm assuming you've interviewed a fair number of people too.
yeah, about 400 interviews.
400. Okay. Yeah. So and then how many times have you been a guest on podcasts?
I don't have the exact number, but at least probably 50.
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, give or take 50 to 100, somewhere in there.
And so what I'm driving at here with all this is like how diverse are the people that you've had on your show or that have had you on your show?
Sure. Pretty diverse. Again, I've had folks on my show, kind of like you, that are, not necessarily Christian, whether that's because they're, Muslim, Jewish, or another faith background, or whether that's because they're what you call New Age, or, they consider them spiritual,
Spiritual
but
but
not
not
religious,
religious. Yeah.
that kind of box, and whatnot. And we can always have a good conversation as long as they're open to it. The only people that have, I think in the years that I've been doing it, I've had one person tell me they didn't want to come on my show because they were conservative and I'm too liberal,
Oh.
which is fine. I don't really see why that was a problem, because I was willing to have them on my show and talk about what they believed, but they didn't want to be on my show. And then there was one person who basically just refused. They said, I won't answer any questions about my faith journey or anything. And I'm like, well, that's part of the show. So, you can't come on, because that's kind of part of what we talk about. And if you're not comfortable talking about that, then you just, you're not a good guest, and that's okay. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. It's just won't fit my show. So I think I've had two guests, but everyone else, has always come on, because I don't treat it as a, you should believe a certain way. It's more of a, just tell me about your journey. I'm always curious how different people come to that relationship, because we have a really diverse, ways of finding God.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious about that. And then as far as on the other shows, I've gone on secular as well as Christian shows to talk about what I do. I go on a lot of leadership podcasts and things like that, because that seems to be people that, are
Uh,
often worried about productivity and finances and those sorts of things. But I'll pretty much go on anyone's show that wants to talk about those things. But yours was a little different, just because you wanted to talk about the religious things. But
yeah.
I always like talking about that. So this has actually been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it stretches me, but it's a lot of fun to actually think about those things and talk about them live, real time like that. So
What's your I gotta let you go, but what's your prayer life like? I know you already told me you do have some set prayers, but there's I would imagine you have a lot of spontaneous prayers. What's the sort of routine daily? Like, do you have a
so I
morning thing, an
I
evening
pray,
thing, or
yeah.
what?
I have a morning prayer and an evening prayer that I do, and then I also have a breath prayer that I do, which is just praying with your breath.
Oh yeah.
I do it as a form of meditation,
Oh,
or
centering
a
prayer.
way of recentering and calming. Yeah, it's a
Oh,
centering prayer, um, and it's real simple. It's just, God, your will be done, not mine. Just to remind myself that sometimes when I'm pushing so hard on something, am I really pushing on what God wants me to push on, or am I pushing on it because I want it?
yeah.
And just remind myself to step back from that, maybe, and breathe and calm down and think about it again.
Cool. Very cool. So I'd like to have you back sometime just to talk a little bit more in depth about the Bible. You don't need to be an expert on the Bible, but I mean, you're Protestant. I'm Catholic, so you're probably more well versed than I am on the Bible. But we do value the Bible. We do value the Bible. Some people. There's some joke that they make about Catholics, like we don't know the address, like it's
Right,
like we don't know the chapter and verse, that kind of thing.
right.
We have a familiarity with it, but in terms of if you do come back, it would be fun to kind of explore the Old Testament because there's some challenging stuff in there. And
Absolutely.
I don't know how deeply you go into it. A lot of my Protestant guests, they do nothing but Bible study, so they have a lot of knowledge. But even if you aren't that kind of Protestant, you probably have your reactions, your favorite portions of Old and New Testament, and you have insights that you've gleaned and stuff like that. So it'd be fun
Sure.
to chat with you if you do come back.
Absolutely. I'd be willing to come back anytime.
All right, my brother. So God bless you. I hope you're going to pray for me and mine. And
I absolutely will.
I enroll all of my guests in a perpetual mass. You're getting the graces of the mass every day, you and your family. Okay.
Absolutely. I would be blessed by that. Thank you.
Great to meet you. Thanks again for taking the time, and keep in touch. Reach out. You have my email, right? So just reach out, and
Yes,
in a few months or whatever, we'll do it again.
absolutely.
All right. Nice to meet you. Have a
Good
nice
to meet
evening.
you.
God bless.